Hi, I'm Katherine Ashmore, and welcome to the Mindset Exchange. AI is moving fast, faster than most humans are wired to adapt to. And while there's a lot of noise about tools, prompts, and productivity, what I'm seeing with leaders and entrepreneurs is something deeper. It's not fear of the technology, it's uncertainty about identity, confidence, and where human value sits as the rules change. In this episode, I'm joined by Nikki Barua, a serial entrepreneur and transformation expert who's spent over 2 decades helping organisations reinvent how they work, with a strong belief that people, not just technology, shape what comes next. Together, we explore what AI is really asking of leaders right now, the shift from expert to explorer, and why curiosity and self-trust matter more than certainty. Here goes.
Hi, Nikki. It's lovely to have you here. Welcome. For anyone who doesn't know your story, could you share a bit about who you are and what's led you to the work you're doing now?
Well, thanks for inviting me to your show. I'm thrilled to be here. And today's conversation is going to be really exciting because we're talking about all of the things that make us uniquely human. And that's really the through line of my own journey. The through line has been all about reinvention.
Yeah.
Whether it was me coming to the United States as an immigrant and had to completely reinvent myself to fit in here, to building my corporate career and working in strategy and transformation for many years with some of the world's largest companies and helping them go to market faster, or walking away from my corporate career at the height of it and stepping into entrepreneurship and building and scaling multiple businesses. Each time I've had to reinvent and really consider, how do you create more value in the world based on where the
Yeah.
world's headed, and what parts of yourself do you have to shed so that you can become the next version of you. And that's the journey I'm still on.
Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that, Nikki. That's wonderful. And what's really stood out for me, and also in our conversations offline as well, is how consistent that thread has been throughout your journey, and, working in technology and entrepreneurship, and a real interest in how people experience change. And so I think this sort of feels like a good area to start, doesn't it? And you've
Yeah.
had a long view of AI. It's not just a new thing. It's not just a trendy buzzword for you. You've been doing this for a very long time. It's, from where you stand today, what do you think people most understand about where AI actually is right now?
Well, AI is not new technology. First of all, it's been in development for a long time. What's happened in the past year, though, is that there's mass adoption, particularly of generative AI. So suddenly everybody has access to these large language models and are able to interact and just see the sheer power and scale and speed of it, which is the exciting thing. But this is technology that has been in the purview of scientists and researchers and mathematicians for a long time. What excites me about where we are is that we are still at very early stages. And yet the fact that it has gained that kind of mass adoption, and we're discovering new use cases and new applications every single day, allows us to really leverage the power of this technology for solving humanity's greatest challenges. And when we kind of leverage the power of human creativity and contextual wisdom, along with the agentic scale that AI brings, now you've got infinite intelligence available to everyone. But what everyone has to recognize is that we're still at the very, very early stages. There's a lot more that's going to happen, and it's going to happen
Yeah.
over the next 3 to 5 years very quickly.
Yeah, yeah. And as you say, it's at the beginning of it. So the scope and the potential is very, very exciting. Now, one of the things that really stayed with me when we spoke was this shift feels very different, largely because of speed. And when you talk about speed, you're not just talking about technological progress, but the rate of adoption, where it's months rather than decades. Why does that pace make the human side of change, and especially identity, the real bottleneck?
Yeah. Well, let's go back in time and consider some of the other tech revolutions that have changed, what the human experience has been like. I mean, if you go way back in time, the industrial age was really the thing that led to the modern workplace, and how organizations developed, the org structures, management principles, and so forth. And we became office workers because of that. And then you go back to what happened with the advent of the internet. It still took about almost 3 decades for there to be real mass adoption globally. But that fundamentally changed our way of life, how we shop, how we learn, how we collaborate with each other. Even mobile and cloud technologies took well over a decade for real adoption. What's different with AI, though, is that that same scale of adoption has happened in a matter of months.
Yeah.
And when there's that speed and scale of any kind of new change, it becomes unnatural for humans to adapt to it. And
Yeah.
what we are finding is that people are using it sort of like a superficial tool, like a thing you want to tinker with. But that's not what's really the true transformation that is necessary, is that the real power exists when we have human and machine collaboration. When we think of AI as our colleague, our coworker, our partner in achieving anything we want to. But in order to get to that place, you first have to unlearn the old way of doing things. You have to shed the identity with which you showed up previously in this previous pre-AI era, and the ways that we did our work, and the ways that we made decisions or communicated or collaborated. Until you let go of those identities, you're not really see the full power and potential of what you can do with AI.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And one pattern I consistently see across leaders and entrepreneurs is that it's not the fear of the technology. There's genuine curiosity there. It's more about being unsure how to position themselves with AI, where to start, and where their role becomes as the old markers of expertise are changing. And when we talk about identity, you talked to me about the idea of moving from expert to explorer, and that really resonated. When you talk about that shift, what does it actually look like day to day for someone who's built their career on being the expert or the person with the answers?
Yeah. See, one of the things that's so incredible about working with AI is that you have to lead from a place of curiosity.
Yeah.
Here's this machine that knows more than any one human being can ever know, right? So you've got infinite intelligence at your disposal. But what allows you to get the best output is asking powerful questions,
Mm,
of being open to new ideas. And
mm,
when you go into any scenario saying you know it all, that you
yeah.
don't need to learn, that you only are seeking certainty, it prevents you from really discovering all kinds of new things. And so that's really part of the identity challenge,
Yeah.
is that our identities, particularly people that are highly experienced, highly accomplished, our identities are built on being known for something.
Yeah.
We even describe ourselves. I'm an expert in such and such thing, or I have this title and this kind of status and power in this company. We associate our identity with all of the things we've accumulated over a decade or two. And when we get to that place, that becomes our security blanket. It's very hard to shed that and let it go and say, I'm willing to be a day one rookie. I'm willing to let go of what defined me, and I'm willing to discover what will come next from it. In order to get to that place, you really have to be more of an explorer who's okay with uncertainty, who's willing to lead with curiosity and allow it to take them where it takes them. When you go into that kind of mindset, you'll
Mm,
discover entirely new ways of doing things, because the old way of being an expert kind of puts you in a box of a formula that worked in the past. And that
yeah.
same formula will not translate in the future.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And would you say there's certain parts of the identity that people tend to cling to, which won't serve them anymore?
In our work, some of the things that we've seen repeatedly tend to be the most rigid that people hold on to are things around our conditioned beliefs,
Yeah.
which often become limiting beliefs. So I'll
Yeah.
give you an example of somebody that we were working with who said, the reason I don't like to use AI is because I was raised to believe that hard work defines my worth.
Yeah.
So I'm first in, last out in the office. I work really, really hard at everything. I put in my 80-hour work weeks. And
Mm,
now suddenly AI can do the same thing in a matter of minutes. well, that makes me feel undervalued or unworthy, and therefore I'm not going to use it. Now, that's an identity that is built on a certain set of conditioning and core values, that unless that shifts, where you shift from effort to value creation, you're
Yeah.
not going to really know how to move from a industrial age mindset into an AI age mindset.
Yeah, you can understand why a lot of people are losing confidence actually, because the landscape is changing and there's certain parameters that are just out of the comfort zone, aren't there? So what would you say people confuse? Where do people confuse letting go with losing confidence?
That's such a great question. When our confidence is often built on what we know.
Mm,
And what this new landscape requires us to do is shift our confidence to what we can figure out, not
yeah.
necessarily on what we already know, right? So you
Mm,
have to trust that no matter how uncertain the future looks like, and it doesn't matter if there's a lot more that you don't know than a lot than what you do know, you have to trust that you can figure it out. So the meta skill that you should have confidence about is the skill of learning.
yeah.
As long as you're the kind of person who can learn anything and you're agile and you're willing to adapt to change, and that you are able to lead with curiosity and those questions, you have a thinking partner that can
Yeah.
give you the answers. You don't have to know it all, but you do have to know how to learn, and you do have to be comfortable with change. And that's the shift in confidence, is move from the expertise and the knowledge into agility and adaptability. Derive your confidence from that, and you will be just fine. And a lot
Yeah.
of people, what they're really struggling with is overwhelm.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's not so much that people are resisting change, or in fact, there's a lot of excitement for AI because people use it every day now, and
Mm,
they're excited about what's possible with that. They're figuring out new ways to incorporate AI into their lives. But there's also a sense of overwhelm that by the time I master this one little thing, 20 other new things come about. And I cannot
yeah.
keep up with the evolution of each of these models. I can't keep up with the thousands of tools that keep launching. How am I supposed to master it all? Well, you got to shed the idea of mastery
Yeah.
over these tools and focus on mastery over yourself.
Completely. 100% agree with that. Thank you for sharing that. Where there's going to be so much uncertainty, the rate of change is it's not going to slow down. It's just going to get faster and faster and faster. So I think it's that sense of being okay with uncertainty, but almost thinking about it strategically and thinking, well, I have to let go of what I can't control, but I can control myself and what I do. And how does that work with how I work? How does that work with my business going forward?
Does bring about a level of sort of stoic sense, right? I
Yeah,
mean, you have to become unshakable towards anything else outside of yourself,
yeah,
because those are all the parts you cannot control.
yeah,
The speed scale of change is going to keep accelerating.
yeah,
The number of things you don't know, that will keep increasing. And
yeah,
and so you kind of have to become unshakable in the midst of all of that. And
yeah,
the ability to master yourself and be calm and remain curious and adventurous and always have that rookie mindset of someone who's completely open to learning new things. That is really what the challenge of these times are for us.
yeah, 100%. It's having that growth mindset and also not being afraid that you might get things wrong. That's okay because there'll be plenty of other things where you'll get it right. And you've even reinvented yourself many times over your careers. What's something, if you don't mind sharing, that you've personally had to let go of recently?
What has helped me reinvent over and over again is really thinking of identity as flexible
Mm,
rather than fixed.
yeah,
That's what made the biggest difference, is when we attach so much of our worth and our sense of self to a fixed identity. This is who I am, and anything that challenges that or breaks that mold or threatens it starts to crumble us on the inside. For me, what has helped is really thinking of that as malleable,
yeah,
thinking of it, what is the next chapter of my life, yet to be written? what is it that excites me from a purpose and passion and growth and contribution standpoint in this chapter, and who do I need to become in
Yeah.
order to play in that? And when you think of who do I need to become, it helps you define this new identity, and it gives you a bridge to go from your current identity to your future identity and start to build that kind of the next mindset, the next set of skills, the next set of
Yeah.
strategies and confidence, and become that. And once you've done it a few times, it becomes so second nature that you don't think about it. It's sort of,
Yeah.
I can look back to so many chapters in the past and say, oh, yeah, I remember when that was me, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And still parts of yourself, but it's like trying out new outfits in your wardrobe. You keep cycling through new ones because it's the one that fits you best for this next stage.
Thanks for sharing that, Nikki. And this is where, values, being value led is so important as well, even if things are changing around you and it can feel uncomfortable. But
Mhm.
growth will happen if you're willing to meet it. And this is where the importance of identifying a zone of genius for this era, not the one that you built years ago, is so important. My sort of coaching can help clearly with getting clarity on identifying your identity or zones of genius. But how can someone start to recognize what genuinely belongs to them now, the work AI can't replicate?
Mhm. Yeah, that's such an important thing for people to gain clarity on because, when we think about what our unique superpowers are,
Yeah,
we've historically defined it in context of either our own strengths or in correlation with people around us, right?
yeah,
Compared to my team, everybody on my team, here's what I do better than my team. Therefore, it's my superpower, my strength that I bring to this team. What is different now that you have to consider is one of your team members is AI.
yeah,
And so don't just think about the humans on your team or in your workplace or in context of what you do in your industry. Think about where AI plays a role. And from that place, consider what is the unique zone of genius that will withstand the test of time and
yeah,
actually continue to create value. And most of those really go back to who you are and the lived experiences that you bring to the table, because those are the things that are innately human:
mm,
creativity, compassion, your relationship building skills, your wisdom, your judgment, even your taste. That is the result of the intersection of things that you enjoy or are passionate about, have built a perspective on. Those are the things that are irreplaceable and give
yeah,
you this unique edge. And so the more you hone in and again understand what that is, that's what allows you to then bring something unique to the table, but also amplify it using AI.
yeah, absolutely. And also it's retaining that critical thinking of
Mm.
seeing it, as you say, like a colleague, but you're in the driving seat. And thinking about obviously the traits that you kindly shared there, which human capabilities do you see compounding most strongly with AI?
I see judgment as one thing that is
Mm,
um, truly, well, I forget that line, but it's something to the effect of to have good judgment, you need a lot of experiences, many of which are bad. And bad experiences come from bad judgment, but until you have those, you can get to good judgment. So it is really something that has compounded over time based on the experiences and the good decisions, bad decisions that you make. But that gives you a wealth of knowledge that
mm,
isn't just computational. It's
yeah,
not just as simple as an algorithm that can spit out a point of view. So ultimately having judgment that is remains in the hands of humans, even
mm,
if you're overseeing a team of agentic AI colleagues, retaining judgment in that. The other piece that I think that is so powerfully human and really one of the defining things about what makes humans humans is imagination.
mm,
We have tons of powerful creative tools at our disposal, but that's
yeah,
not the same as imagination.
no.
So honing in on your imagination and of anything that you seek, that you now have the tools to bring that to life.
Fantastic. Yeah. And in my line of work, the people who adapt best, thinking about adapting to this change and being flexible, are the ones who sometimes think about doing just one thing deliberately or strategically with intention to start. And for anyone listening who feels unsure where to begin, What's a sensible first step they could take this week, in your opinion?
Mm. Think about what is the most important thing that will move your life or your career or your business forward. Start with
Mm,
that, not with a
mm,
tool, not with a prompt or a question or an app. Think about what is the change that will accelerate outcomes in your life, career, or business. And from that, identify what is blocking you.
yeah,
Is it lack of efficiency? Is it lack of leverage? Is it lack of insight and knowledge? Once you identify those use cases, pick any one thing and then leverage. This is now where you start to leverage AI and start to prompt it with the things that'll help you solve those problems. It's a matter of connecting it to the highest value proposition
yeah,
instead of simply experimenting where it's great that if it's just fun and games, but you won't see the real impact on your life. And above all, don't be a bystander. There are
yeah.
too many people that are still waiting for or feeling like, hey, this is not going to impact my life as much. So it's okay for me to not experiment with it. What's important right now is don't be a bystander. Step into the arena, start learning to play the game and building your competency and your skills in it.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice because I think there are always going to be people who've got into this a bit further ahead than anyone else. I think that's going to be just the landscape, and it's really important to try now. Do you think there'll be a time where there definitely will be the haves and the have-nots?
Yes, I think the divide is already
Mm,
growing, and we're seeing
yeah,
that in so many ways, right? There are
mm,
people that are at the leading edge of the innovation and growth and change that's happening, and they are going to win disproportionately. And you see this in companies too. There are companies that are just getting exponentially bigger simply because they have access. And the same is going to be true of individuals. That divide is something that you can close yourself. This
yeah,
is not about the environment or the economy or the government. This is something you do have control over of bridging the divide because all of us have access to the same intelligence. So the
yeah.
question is, how do you bridge that divide and become exponentially capable? And the only way you can do that is by not avoiding it. You've got to step into it.
Yeah, starting small, even just small to begin with, that's the starting point. And with so many tools available, I think I've said it to other people, it's a bit like shiny toy syndrome, isn't it? What's a simple rule, would you say, for deciding what to try and what to ignore?
Well, the simple ones to use, certainly like any of the LLMs. I mean, try the Chat GPT or Claude, any of those, because it's almost like using Google in a browser, right? It's no
Yeah,
different, so those are the easiest ones to just get comfortable with. From there, look at, again, what area do you need the most help with? And being able to even ask ChatGPT, what tools would it recommend for you given your exact scenario and what kind of problems you're trying to solve or what your profile looks like? What do people like you most benefit from? And ask it to recommend a tool and start from that. There's a plethora of tools coming out every single day. So there's no
yeah,
limit to what is out there. Not all of them will survive. Some of those startups may cease to exist at some point, but it's not about a specific tool. It's really about building your competency.
yeah,
The
yeah,
more of these you use and it starts to shift how you think about yourself and how you get work done or how you produce results. When you
mhm,
start thinking about AI as your co-evolution partner, that you're learning and growing together, you're adapting together. You're not doing it alone, nor is AI doing it alone. You're doing it together. When you start to think that way, then it's not about any one tool. It is really about you and this technology as a people squared, as a clone of yourself, if you will.
yeah. We're going to touch on the twin side of it a bit later, but I think people have a natural fear of telling or giving too much information about themselves to AI.
Mhm.
Um, Yet the only way to train it to get better is to give it more information. Is there anything you could say to people listening to appease that fear?
Yeah. So first of all, with every single one of these tools, you have the option of going into the settings and making it anonymous. So it does
Mm,
not use your particular data in order to train the core model. So you certainly have that option. But that's not the point. Ultimately, what's different about this technology versus others, in the past, when there were new technologies, we had to learn how to use it. right? They have
Mm.
to learn how to use the internet or mobile technology or cloud. All of these things, we have to learn how to use it. What's different here is you're not just learning it, you're actually teaching it. And the more you teach it, the more personalized and valuable and powerful it gets for you. So in the absence of giving it that information, you're also limiting the kind of output you can get with it. So that's why it's an extension of you, and it has to get to know you. And that's where effectively training it in a way that gives you the best results is part of the skill set that people have to develop.
Thank you for sharing that. We've discussed also your work focuses maybe a bit less on the individual and you focus more inside large organizations. When leaders go through your reinvention labs, what's the first internal change they usually have to make, would you say?
Change traditionally in large organizations has been top down, outside in
Mm,
often. It's sort of here's the new way, here's where we're going, and now everybody else has to come along. And they also that kind of change tends to be episodic, where there's a start date and end date, because things weren't that fast paced before. You
yeah,
could afford to implement a kind of change and then stay in that status quo for some time. That
mm,
is no longer true. Now change is continuous. And if you wait to be told from the top or bring in outside experts to tell you what to do, you're never going to really have that continuous reinvention cycle. And so a lot of the work that we do is built around this continuous reinvention sprint. Every 90 days is a change. And for leaders of those organizations, it's recognizing that they don't have the answers either, that they're
yeah,
part of this change process. They're not directing it, they are
mm,
going through it themselves. And so it requires a level of vulnerability and trust and a different leadership style of earning the trust of their teams, because the teams also know that there's no fixed answers, but they're looking for their executives to provide that kind of clarity and openness and transparency. And when leaders show up with that kind of transparency, that's what actually builds that collaboration and the trust to then evolve together. That's
yeah,
what unleashes grassroots innovation, because now everybody feels like a change agent, feels like an innovator, and they're moving
yeah.
towards this future as explorers together.
Yeah, in it together and full transparency. What's one practical change that teams can make then that has a really outsized impact?
It's how they work. The workflows are where all of the efficiency and profit gain and speed is locked in. Because you could give people training on how to use AI or think with AI and all of that. And you can certainly buy a ton of technology and invest in the licenses and deploy all of that. But none of that will fundamentally change how someone does their job day to day or how
Yeah.
teams collaborate together. So you take the sales function of an organization or the marketing function or the operations function. Everything in organizations is built in a certain way. You know,
Mm,
how you do one step of the process to the next and how the handoffs happen and all of that. And all of that was built for pre-AI age. So when you get those teams to look at it from a blank slate to say, how might we design that today?
yeah.
What parts need to be completely eliminated? What needs to be delegated to AI? What could be shortened or done completely differently? It gives them an entirely different view of the work. And we've seen that it releases anywhere from 40 to 60% of capacity just by redoing the workflows. Now, if you think about all of that excess capacity and you have the same headcount, that essentially means you could double your output. You could double your throughput. You could do so much more as a team without adding one extra headcount. And part of the reason we do it this way is that also in our minds saves jobs, because
Mm,
these are people that had they not reinvented the workflows themselves and elevated to higher value work might have been eliminated. So
y-
part of our commitment is also helping them transition into this new world by themselves and feeling empowered to create that change, and then reallocating that excess capacity into higher value work that
mm.
they can then change how they are valued in the workplace.
Yeah, I mean, the potential is really quite exciting. And thinking about that potential, also a lot of people are talking about a golden age of entrepreneurship. And there's so much opportunity out there,
Mm.
which is an interesting contrast to some of the narratives that have been out there as well. What
Yeah.
opportunities do you think people are underestimating right now with that in mind?
First of all, part of the reason for growth of entrepreneurship is because there are fewer roadblocks into pursuing your dreams.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you went back 5 or 10 years, you needed capital, you needed to hire people, you needed resources to build a tech product or any kind
Mm.
of product solution. It required a lot of resources and a lot of time.
Yeah.
And that prevented a lot of people that might have had interest in entrepreneurship. That became the gatekeeping function in that. Today, anyone with a big dream and an idea can actually bring all of those things to life in less than a week. And you don't really need that much funding or a huge team to do it. You're only limited by your imagination and your courage. That's it.
Yeah.
On the other hand, entrepreneurship is also going to grow because large companies will either shrink or stay the same. Hiring is going to be constrained simply because they are going to need less capacity. With so much productivity spike, you're not going to need that many people. And some people will be forced into entrepreneurship because they lost their jobs and there were no other ways of making a living. So with that growth, I think we're going to see teams change their form. Instead of big companies just having internal teams, you're going to see a growth in the gig economy where individual freelancers and experts can plug into larger organizations and bring their expertise in that. So you're going to see a lot more fluidity in that instead of these large pyramids that look like a Titanic that move really slow. You're going to start
Yeah.
seeing much more molecular structure of smaller, high functioning, high performing teams of experts coming together that move really fast, like agile speedboats heading in the same direction. And
Yeah.
that unleashes creativity, that unleashes performance and productivity. There's a lot more ideas that can be brought to life. And there's no shortage of the number of things that any entrepreneur can pursue.
Yeah.
The only thing we have to keep in mind is that even though it's easier to start, it's going to be equally harder to stay in business unless you're constantly innovating. So that
Yeah.
idea of continuous reinvention isn't just for big companies. Efficiency gains isn't just for big companies. Even if you are a solopreneur or a small business, you have to have that same exact mindset. There is no safety in status quo anymore.
No, no. And it's changing from that fear mindset to growth and opportunity mindset that's constant. And that is quite exciting, especially with a lot of people's natural fear that there's going to be a lot of job loss. And as roles and industries shift, how can people protect their sense of purpose and usefulness, not just their employability?
Yes. The good thing is that we now have a blank canvas to pursue almost any idea. Like I said, imagination is the only thing that will
Mm.
limit a person from whatever they seek to do. There are no limits anymore because on one hand, you have infinite imagination. On the other hand, you have infinite intelligence and power to bring that to life. Think of AI like electricity. If you have it, what could you power with it? That
Mm.
is the question to answer for yourself. There will be a time where we will not have to exchange our effort or hours for income
Mm.
because productivity boosts so much, maybe in a decade, that machines are doing all of the work and we don't need to do that. The question is, if that were to be true today, what gives you fulfillment?
Yeah.
What is the thing that makes you want to jump out of bed and apply yourself? Whatever that is, start building towards that.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, it's creative aspirations or it's things that are about service and contribution
Mm.
and about creating impact and finding that piece that never changes, no matter how much industries evolve or technology changes. Staying true to that is the thing that'll give us hope and continue to make a difference in the
Yeah, it's that irony of using machine to help what we do, but actually it's what makes us human that's going to be able to help us move forward and potentially differentiate us from other people because we all have our unique gifts to offer or experiences to offer. And we touched on this briefly before, and I found it fascinating. For people unfamiliar with this idea, what are digital twins and where does the human element remain essential?
Yeah. So the type of AI that most people are used to leveraging today is generative AI, where
Mm.
it generates the next best response or predicts a response based on the inputs that you gave it. So it really
Mm.
depends on the input you provide for it to take action. And think of it like it's your research buddy, your artificial intern, that when
Yeah.
you tell it what to do, your artificial intern goes and does that job. The difference with agentic AI is that once it's programmed a certain way, it needs no instruction. It will go and do the work on its own autonomously. And that's why it's so important to give it the correct instructions, but also set guardrails and safety and privacy constraints that make sure that it doesn't go off the rails. But could basically create an AI agent that does most of your job today and have the agents do the work. And as long as you are still the one overseeing it and ensuring that there are checks and balances that manage the entire thing. But at its core, what we are moving towards in this agentic age is that we are replacing parts of ourselves that were about effort and
Mm.
repetition and things that are predictable that machines can do better, faster, and cheaper than we can, and elevating ourselves and our humanity to higher value work and higher value activities that machines cannot do as well as we can.
Mm.
In some ways, it's bringing the old industrial age to a closure, right? And
Yeah.
if you think back to what was society like, what was human civilization like prior to that, what kinds of things did people do? And
Mm.
it was a lot around things that were innately human. And then we
Yeah.
turned into these productivity machines and we went from human being to human doing.
Yeah.
And that's really what's the parts that are being shed right now is the doing part. And we're going back to being.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think around that, talking about keeping an eye on what they're up to, from an ethics point of view, where should leaders be drawing ethical boundaries early?
Bias is very easy
Mm.
to get programmed into it. So it's important to be mindful of, even in our own experiences or small teams, thinking about where is bias being fed into the model. When we consider how does that bias play out in terms of who has access and who does not, or the
Mm.
decisions that get made. And then certainly from a privacy and security standpoint, that's extremely important. A lot of these are about just having clear governance and
Yeah.
guardrails, whether it's done at an individual level or certainly for organizations. That's really, really important because we're seeing in companies a lot of what's called shadow AI, that employees are using their own tools, paying out of their own personal credit cards and leveraging things that are being fed company confidential materials simply because the company did not define clear governance around that.
Mm.
So that's where you start to cross lines in the absence of clarity on what to do. The leadership mandate is so critical at this time to not wait for perfect conditions, to not wait for their own comfort and confidence around it, but to lead into the unknown so that they can provide clarity to the teams that are looking to them for guidance.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Nikki. We've covered a lot of ground today. If listeners were to just take one behavior from this conversation, what would you suggest?
Lead with curiosity. Don't be attached to your identity because whatever you know is going to become obsolete or irrelevant in no time. What's really important is that you go from all knowing to always learning
Hmm.
and be that explorer who's constantly leading with curiosity. I think the future is bright and full of possibilities for us to be more human and really amplify our humanity in ways that was never possible before. So I hope everyone is excited about that and
Yeah,
is willing to unlearn and shed the old parts in order to embrace the new.
yeah, it is really exciting. And finally, I'm going to ask this one last question, which I ask all of my guests at the end of the episode, which is if you were to recommend a book, what would you recommend and why?
Hmm. Um, Not related to AI, but the reason I would recommend this is Atomic Habits,
Yeah.
only because so much of the unlearning and shedding part comes down to how we learn what makes the next part of us. So that skill of unlearning and learning, I think Atomic Habits is a great framework for doing exactly that.
Yeah, it's a brilliant book. Thank you for recommending that. And thank you also for everything you shared today. It's been such a thoughtful conversation. Where can people follow your work and stay connected with you?
through my website at nikkibarua.com or through LinkedIn. And also my new company, flipwork.ai, provides a lot of great resources and actionable strategies to people.
That's wonderful. Thanks again, Nikki. It's been really lovely to chat. Could have chatted for ages about this.
Thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
My pleasure too. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Mindset Exchange podcast. That was my conversation with Nikki Barua. If there's one thing to take away, it's this. Leading well right now isn't about certainty or control. It's about curiosity, clarity, and self-trust. If this conversation resonated, I'd love you to share it with someone who's navigating their own leadership journey right now. If you'd like to connect with Nikki or explore my coaching around any of these areas, you'll find the details in the show notes. And you can always find me on LinkedIn too. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next episode. Thanks for being here. See you next time.